What's the goddamn line say, Tony?
Please do not use gendered language.
Then what? I'll be arrested, put in airport jail?
Look, you're going completely sideways, man.
It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
How dare you?
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
I'm Chris Hansen with Dave on NBC.
Jack Marius Tac-Theratrix.
Hi, I'm Spartacus.
Jackson, Sacramento, he, him. Steven Seagal.
Sex offender guy.
I'm Keith Morris.
This is Mumbai Kutapi.
I'm Rick James, bitch.
Sorting through the lies.
The hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
We cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
And uncovering the centuries-long plan for world domination.
Learning about Cuba, having some food.
Let's talk about Chinese people.
Have you ever been in a Turkish prison? Swangles and Fort Lauderdale.
I have sent 6 of my Libyan missiles to blow up the Sears hardware department.
Nothing could be more fun than jumping off a cliff with 2 German bisexuals.
Oh, you English are so superior, aren't you?
Thank you, comrade.
And now, Macroaggressions.
That's what assholes call it.
With your host,
Buddy, I don't know who you are, but you're about to get chlamydia.
Charlie Robinson.
Hey, Whitey, where's your hat?
You want to drop the blame on Charlie and say it's all Charlie's fault.
He was a retard.
I get some goddamn diuretic.
Welcome to Macroaggressions. I'm your host, Charlie Robinson. If you are watching us on Iconic or Rockfin, or you're listening wherever podcasts are served, we certainly do appreciate your support. Couldn't do it without our sponsors. ChemicalFreeBody.com has been great to us. Tim James, the owner of that company, has been a guest on this show multiple times. His products are certified organic. They are plant-based. They're dairy-free, soy-free, GMO-free, gluten-free. The only thing that isn't free is the price, but I'll tell you what, he put a promo code MACRO on there so that it will save you a little bit of money. They have free shipping, $99 and over inside the United States. So do what I did. Yeah, take a look at some of their products. I gave out Christmas gifts. Gut Detox, Toxin Detox. They've got Green 85 in there as well. A ton of options for you. Not just physical options, but you can also sign up for coaching from Tim James himself. So take a look. Go to chemicalfreebody.com. Use the promo code MACRO. Support a small business. Support this show at the same time. We certainly do appreciate it. Take care of your body. And we also have our second sponsor is Honey Colony. Same thing. It's a small business run by Miriam Hanane. We've had her on the show as well. She's the director of Vanishing of the Bees. She started a company called Honey Colony, and they have all kinds of products available there for you. Skin care, immune system boost, home and garden gifts. You can get food. You can get sexual health items, all kinds of available products for you. So if you've been giving your spouse the same thing over and over again, at least take a look. Look at honeycolony.com. If you find something you like and you check it out, use promo code MACRO on your way out. Save yourself some money, support a small business. And of course, as always, if you like this show, share it with your friends and family, because the algorithms aren't going to do us any good. So, we've got a tough topic for today's show, but it's very important because it deals with children, and it's heavy duty. So I wanted to bring in Lee Veltman, who is somebody that I've known for a little while now. We've done some shows together. Lee has a deep understanding of what is known as the troubled teen industry. And Lee, thanks for coming on. I appreciate you coming in to talk about this. I know this isn't going to be unicorns and rainbows. This is going to be sort of a heavy topic, but I think it's important for people to talk about this and know about it, because it doesn't get a whole lot of play. It certainly doesn't get much play in the mainstream media. So thanks, Lee, for coming in.
Oh, Charlie, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Well, talk to us about this the concept, troubled teen industry. I mean, geez, there shouldn't be such a thing. But there also shouldn't be a private prison industry, and there is. So since these things do exist, maybe walk us through what it is, what it entails, what it is not, maybe, and who's in charge of this.
Okay, I'll try to do my best because that's a lot of people right now. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It will never go away. There will always be troubled teens that need assistance and help, and whatever measures are used are used. I don't have any control over this stuff. I had to go through this experience myself to understand it. And there's been a lot of work done by a lot of people recently with what's known as hashtag breaking code silence and the hashtag ICUSurvivor. You can find those on Twitter and other places. There's a lot of young ladies and boys speaking out against these institutions that use these different techniques and methods for, like I said, it's a fine line between abuse and discipline in these places.
Yeah.
And I try to be very careful to separate what are the RTCs or RTPs, rehabilitation or residential treatment programs and facilities from the wilderness camps part, from the transporters part, and then these boot camp places, because like I said, there's a lot of money in this stuff. A lot of cops are involved with transporting kids. Will come in and kick the doors in at night. I never experienced being transported. I actually went through some other crazier stories with my father and me arguing and fighting. And finally, I got on a plane and flew out to California. But that was my third boarding school. So for me, it was experiences and like it is military school, another school, then to this 2-year program. Is such a different story with the wilderness stuff because I also did camps and went to an Outward Bound.
Right.
And that's where I'm sitting on. The wilderness boot camps are the ones I'm talking about, not these other places. And I know a lot of people get, oh, well, Outward Bound has, and I'm like, yes, every place is going to have incidents at those places. Mm-hmm. Kids run off, fall off a cliff and pass away. It's the kid's fault or it's the program's fault or what, those are actually decided in court. And that's what happened to me about 12 years ago, I think, when this lady named Maya Sklavitska wrote an article that was just called The Cult That Spawned the Troubled Teen Industry. And I read this article and it mentioned my high school and the Stanford Prison Institution and compared these things with a cult known as Synanon that was in Santa Barbara in California. It moved around and actually still exists in Germany today. So that was started by I have it pulled up here because I want to make sure I don't get Chuck E. Dieterich and Mel Semblar.
Okay.
And because all this stuff kind of evolved from different things with them having this thing called the Synanon game to other programs such as the Seed, the Scared Straight Dare program.
Right.
They're all tied up in this stuff, actually.
Really?
Yeah. So that's why it's always been difficult for me to explain it. The interviews I've done in the past, I didn't have the understanding 5 years ago that I have up today because of stuff that's happened in Utah, Missouri recently with Paris Hilton put out a documentary. It's on YouTube. This is Paris. And I was surprised by the documentary. I kind of thought it would be more about her products and other stuff. But no, it's very targeted to a school in Provo Canyon known as Provo Canyon School. Mm-hmm. And so that is why I'm grateful that these people are now having the courage to speak out, being shipped off to a place where you're medicated and made to sit in isolation rooms, sit on chairs facing a wall, and other stuff is, so traumatic for some of these people to go through. And like I said, I never went to that intensive of a program. The place I was in California, we did workshops and celebrations and other stuff. But it's very different from what these other people experience. And I'm grateful that I did start speaking out on these interviews I started doing 5 years ago to have so many survivors come to me and, basically gush out their life story about all these abuses and stuff. And that's where it got real hard for me, hearing these stories about, I was molested by my family. That's why I ended up at this school, a cousin, an uncle, something happened. These people don't get shipped to these schools, for no reason.
Right.
And, like I said, do I have resentments against my own parents for getting shipped off for bad grades and smoking a little weed? Yeah, of course. But, we forgive and forget and move on. We learn. And so that's why I'm really grateful for this time to speak with you about this stuff, because I started losing friends when I started speaking out against this stuff because they are very much in defense of the school I went to. Certain counselors there impacted their lives. And that's where I had to really start listening to that, because while this one person's telling me, oh, they did this and this to me, this other person's giving me another exact opposite story. And I didn't want to get caught between two different friends, but that's happened to me so many times over these last 5 years, because I started really digging into the CEDU incorporated schools.
Yeah, talk about that. Who are they?
Well, the CEDU was the school that came from the Synanon stuff that was started by Chuck E. Dieterich. CEDU stood for a couple different meanings for it. See as I do, or Chuck E. Dieterich University. It was out of Running Springs, California. It was the first program. People from there, and this is why it's important for me to distinguish this, because from that program and from the Scared Straight Dare program, they had what are called first and second generation clones. And then there's even third generation places today that exist. So the WASP survivor group, which WASP stands for Worldwide Association of Specialty Programs, which is a subsidiary of Bain Capital connected to Mitt Romney, is the main company that we focus on because it's the easiest one to connect and track certain people with. But there's also Universal Health Services, NatSap, and a few other companies out there we keep track of, because I at least want to see regulation and oversight done. Some people want, oh no, this can't exist at all. And I'm like, well, equine therapy, some of this stuff with these certain kids with mental health issues, and some of it does work and helps them.
Yeah.
So, distinguishing between places that are super religious and allow no medication and dress codes and very strict rules to these places like where if you mess up, you have to go do slave labor and do dishes and cut wood and use to rebuild these schools. Like I said, literally some of these places are a couple of, a house with some RV things at the beginning, and the kids are used to build, and they hire carpenters. And like I said, most of the fees are about $3,500 to $5,000 a month per student, per client,
Right.
And so it's a big money making business. And when, like I said, when you start talking about the isolation rooms and the boot camps and some of the gay aversion therapy places, these are supposed to be against the law. They're not supposed to exist, but they do.
Yeah.
So I try to be real careful about what places I name and what places I don't. One of the easiest things is to name the places that are shut down. Tranquility Bay, Casa by the Sea. These places were down in Jamaica and South America, Mexico, and other places. There's many of them where kids are forced to dig their own holes. And, it's like, there's a movie with Mila Kunis in it, of all people, literally called Boot Camp. That's about those types of places.
Wow.
I've had a few friends that went through those common experiences. And so that's why I've been very clear, hey, I went through one of these 2-year programs. I didn't leave the campus for a year. I couldn't listen to certain music. If I said things the wrong way, I got in trouble. And the snitching code that's written into these programs, if you don't tell on yourself, you're in trouble. If you have a code with me and this other person are, hey, let's run away. Let's do this. Let's do that. If that person goes and tells, I'm in super deep trouble for not ratting out them more than anything else. So that's where the whole mind control, behavior modification stuff really comes into play. And it does affect everyone's, I can't say it doesn't affect my psyche today.
Yeah.
When I try to have these discussions with other survivors, and they, I was talking to some people, there's a school that was up in Maine known as the Elan School. And it was there's a documentary called, what can I think of it? Gone to the Crazies is the book. The Discarded Ones is another book that's really good that was written by another CEDU survivor. I'll think of the movie. Todd Nielsen made a movie. It's about the Elan School. It was just premiered a couple of years ago. It's about, I use this as a place where kids, the experience there was so different from mine and so abusive because they literally had a boxing ring where boys were made to box each other. Jeez. And if you ran away, they would make you wear a bunny suit, and they would do these, we did the same encounter groups, and the verbalization and the treatment of the children at these places was the same. And so if you were targeted in the school as a troubled kid, even in the school, oh, that's a whore. They would do these encounter groups where that was, oh, you're a slut, you're this, you need to change, you need to stop doing that, you need to stop doing this. So we became our own, watchers in the school. And says that's how the program works. If you were there over a year, you're like junior staff almost. You get on all these committees. Oh, let's welcome the new kids in. And so says I didn't realize that that's what I'd had changed. And then going through these workshops and celebrations, for me, it was very enlightening. I can't say I didn't learn stuff. But when you're in a thing called the Truth, it was called the Truth Prophet or the Truth Celebration where I went to. Mm-hmm. And they pull out this thing called the blackboard. And the first thing they write down is masturbation. For me, it was surreal because I'm 17 years old. This is normal locker room conversation to me. But to have it in a controlled environment in a room where what's said in here stays in here, mentality is applied, that this is a secret we don't take out of this room. Mm-hmm. And you have 13-year-old virgins versus other girls that were sent there for other reasons that were not virgins anymore. Right. With these older men, counselors, having these discussions about masturbation and peanut, like I said, there's always been this, the thing was a peanut butter joke because certain people put peanut butter down in a certain area to have their dogs, and like I said, so they do bring up bestiality even. So that's what I'm sitting on. It was so abusive and disgusting to try to explain this out without, making some disclosures and explain that, some people really did have benefits from this stuff. I think that they use the information to against the parents of the kids. And that's where I'm going to start really pointing out the problems I have with these places. If there's no communication between the child and the parent for 6 months or anything without letters being read, phone calls being monitored, everything, this is literally done. It's on their web pages today. And so that's why it's easy to kind of track some of these places because there's so many web pages out there that are all connected through the corporations that oversee the certain companies that do these things. And like I said, that's why I've been trying to explain it for 8 years plus to my own family and stuff. And my sisters did other things. And, I had a young lady, 3 of my other survivor friends contacted me a few years back. I know my friend Amanda won't mind me mentioning her name. This is kind of hard for me to talk about because she's the one who opened my eyes up to how bad this industry really is. Yeah. She's not just a survivor, she's the daughter of the owner of a school in Missouri that's shut down right now, thankfully to her speaking up for 2 years plus now.
Wow.
And because I get over emotion because she was abused and she started speaking out. No one really gave her credit until a video actually came out that someone got in the place. And it's online right now. You can find it everywhere. Of her father telling another girl to go knock out. That's his words. Go knock her out. And she even talks back. I want her knocked out. So that happens. And so that got to the FBI and it got shut down.
Whoa.
And they're trying to purchase this. Hopefully, I'm not really too sure what they're doing right now because attorneys and senators are involved now. Yeah. It's high news in Missouri. But that's one of the things is these things usually don't get worldwide or too much national attention because those 30 girls at that one school, so that's where are they going to go? That's one of the questions that you now have to ask yourself. And that school being connected to another school in Oregon where a guy left there and now he has a boys school in Oregon. And then there's the Agape Boys home in Missouri too, which there's a few YouTuber channels that are out there now speaking out against all these things. The Hammer podcast is a really good podcast for that group. Mm-hmm. He's interviewing survivors from the Agape Boys home. And like I said, it's back trying to focus a little bit better here now. This stuff goes back 40 to 70 years, depending on which the Seed, Scared Dare program, or the Synanon cult, CEDU Incorporated, other stuff. So it says that's where you got to really understand this stuff really well. Because I've spent years studying this stuff. I was reading books on behavior modification and social engineering, not realizing how much it had affected even me. Yeah. And when people started saying, why aren't you letting it go? You're 49 years old now. That was when you were, 17 to 19. And I'm like, yes, I understand that. But the school that I went to still exists today. It's now a very Catholic school. The kids have to wear GPS monitors everywhere they go. Like I said, it's a lot different than when I was there, marching in line. And I'm like, and so like I said, that some people started coming to me with, hey, this place is still doing this stuff. They still do what's called bans. And I was like, well, so what bans is, you can't talk to someone. I'm like, yeah, but if a girl, and like it says, it took someone really coming to me a few years ago saying this to me for it to click. If a girl is at a school and she's on bans, and bans just mean you cannot communicate, talk to, look at, acknowledge this person even exists. So if that girl's put on bans with all males, because of her sexuality stuff, no big deal, right? Mm-hmm. But now she's gay and put on bands with all girls just because of that reason. That's abusive. Sorry.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to talk to or touch girls for, you're because they think you're and labeled that way because you're butch or whatever. Like I said, so that's one of the reasons I've had to really learn this stuff, because I've had friends that were liberal, left, pro-life, pro-gay. And I'm like, no, I'm not talking out against any of that stuff here. I'm talking about the fact that these people are doing this stuff to these kids today in thousands of places across the United States of America. There's places, like I said, there were some places in Europe, and that you can tie into this stuff. And that's one of the problems I had when I started looking into this too, all the amount of abuse that's like covered up and hidden.
Yeah.
And like when Amanda came forward about her Circle of Hope, that's a very, very strict independent Baptist fundamentalist school itself. And so even then we're accusing her of being like a Satanist witch. And some of it's just crazy what you can hear happens to the survivors of these places. Even them trying to speak out will get attacked by their own families if they're making money off of these places. And if they're behind a 501c3, it's even worse. Nonprofit organization.
Yeah.
And so like I says, that's why when I read this letter from Maia mentioning Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm like, hold on a second, not all of these places are abusive cults. And so thankfully I ran across like Dr. Janet Lilach with the Nexium stuff. She's an amazing woman. But she took the time to answer some DMs for me. And I was talking to her about this stuff. And she's an expert on something called large group awareness training, which they use the same seminars that came out of these programs. So she started explaining it to me, and she filled in some gaps. And I was just like, I never would have understood this unless me and you had talked. And you went through all this other stuff that's so different than my experience here. Thank you for taking the time, and you're speaking out against these abusive cults. And she taught me to speak in to distinguish between what's called a high control group.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this thing called the BITE model that Stephen Hassan uses, and he's a cult expert. So I use those things now. And I use a lot of different web pages. There's secretprisonforteens.dk. That's out there. That's got a lot of information on all these programs and different links to different stuff. CEDU is on there itself specifically. And like it says, when CEDU shut down, it got investigated for being abusive. Kids were, like it says, there had been a counselor that had worked at the CEDU in Running Springs. And like I says, that's where I'm sitting here trying to explain it. CEDU in Running Springs was the first one. But then there was Rocky Mountain Academy in Idaho, which is also called Boulder Creek Academy at one point. Mm-hmm. And then there's a bunch of other places like Cascade. And that evolved out of this stuff. And then people from there went and opened up the Carl Brook School, which I had friends that did that. And like I said, people are trying to really get mad at my friends because they did that. And I'm like, if you understand that they didn't do that because their place didn't get shut down for this, but some stuff happened and money got messed up, so they're no longer operating. So like I said, I got to look at it from both sides of the street.
Yeah.
And like I said, there's what are called educational consultants. They make like $150 an hour to get kickbacks from these places to ship these kids off, to hire the transporters. So it's a huge industry. And like I says, it really got important to me. Like I says, I went to my own family about this stuff because there was a psychiatric facility here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, known as Shadow Mountain. It's shut down, of course, too, for abuses and other stuff. But it was connected to the parent company of that institution. And that was connected to a thing in Dallas, Texas called Timberlawn, which it got shut down for the same reasons. Wow. And so like I said, this was all just in the last 5 years. If Paris had put out her documentary and Amanda hadn't started speaking forward, the laws wouldn't be changing in Utah, Idaho, Montana, and Missouri now.
Wow. It's funny because, I went to boarding school as well in Southern California, and I had a great experience there. I wasn't a troubled teen. It wasn't religious. It wasn't military. It was none of those things. It was, 9th grade to 12th grade, integrated boys and girls.
Now, was there a certain type of school? Did it have was it a charter school or just private boarding school?
Just private boarding school. It had been there for 90 years at the time or so. It had been there a long, long time. Cool. And the campus was neat. It was like kind of narrow, like the roads were a little bit narrow. You can tell it was built when cars were smaller and everything. But I had a great experience. Now, I have friends that went to boarding school on the East Coast. They have a different experience. I have a couple friends of mine that went to boarding school in Canada. They had a different experience. So I know that there's an assumption that a lot of people make. Well, whenever I would tell people I went to boarding school, they'd say, "Oh, were you a bad kid?" Well, no, I mean maybe, but that wasn't the reason why I went there. I went because it was a great place, great education, and you could be a boarding student, or there was also a day student component to it too. If you lived in the area, you could kind of commute and go back. But those people felt they were sort of looked at as not getting the full experience. We lived on campus. We had dorm, so people are like, "Oh, I moved out of my house when I was 18." It's like, I moved out of my house when I was 13. Right. So I had a much, by the time I got to college, everyone's like, "We're free." I'm like, I've been doing this for 4 years. I liked it. I found great friends, lifelong friends, good people. I didn't see any of this abuse. I was at the right place. I wasn't at the wrong place, but I'm not naive. And I understand that when you get these situations where you have kids away from their parents, just about anything can happen. And you're sort of dependent on the honesty and integrity of the school and the counselors and all that things. I've talked about how like people say like, what is it about being a Boy Scout troop leader that makes people a pedophile? And it's like, it's not that. It's that pedophiles go where the hunting's good, and that's being a Boy Scout troop leader. So when you have these schools, and you can even have the best of intentions, it will potentially attract some bad people that see this as an opportunity to be in close proximity with kids that don't have their parents, and that may be, and especially if they're troubled, well, then it's like, well, then you almost have perfect cover if you're a psychopathic pedophile or just a pervert, because then it's your word against a troubled teen's word. And that is, of course, you'll win that every time, because you'll say, I'm the counselor, I'm the school counselor, and they're making this up. Why do you think they're here in the first place? Because they're liars. They're screwed up kids. That's what we have to deal with. This comes with the territory. Wouldn't be the first time I was accused of raping these kids. It's You'd
be very surprised how much that happens.
Yeah. I mean, it creates cover for maniacs to get in there and do unspeakable things, because it's like being a prison guard in a prison. You just go, these are all convicted felons, man. Of course they're going to say that I'm doing bad things when nobody's around and the cameras are turned off. They're convicted.
Well, that's why it's kind of, to me, a messed up situation when the counselors that run these schools are telling the parents, expect your children to be lying to you about what's happening here, because they want to come home. Yeah.
You're like, well, they were lying to me. That's the reason why I sent them off to you. You're supposed to fix that or whatever. And I'm sure that there's a segment of parents that are like, I'm busy running my multi-million-dollar corporation. Take the kids and just get rid of them.
That's very true. Like I said, that's one of the things is it's very much, this is a sold program to parents that want their kids to disappear, get out of their hair, basically.
Yeah.
And like I said, if they had known it was cult-like and this coercion and persuasion was used in a controlled environment that was going to keep them separated from the family for the rest of their lives, they might not do this stuff. But like I said, they don't know that. Mm-hmm. At first, they are desperate to, I need my kids somewhere else besides home because marital affairs, something's going on.
Yeah.
So that's where it's just a sad story here. And like that's the thing is I had to hear when I was at this school, when I was 17 years old, hearing why these people are here and having me to, go in these workshops and celebrations. And we had weekly, 3 times a week, we had to sit in circles and yell at each other, run our feelings, deal with our anger, like to the point where we're pounding on the floor and stuff. It's that abusive. And like I said, there's no other way to put it. But they let these encounter groups, like I said, that's what I'm saying. If you're going to an AA meeting and you're sitting in a circle, just telling war stories, it's a lot different than sitting in these encounter groups where, you have to fill out a request form to have this person in the group. You make sure that the counselor you want there with all your buddies are there.
Right.
So it becomes very Lord of the Flies is really the best way to try to explain this stuff. But that's how manipulative it becomes when these kids who went through these programs start running the programs themselves.
Is that what happened with NXIVM? Because we've got the Bronfman family in their role running the World Jewish Congress and the sort of they have
Stacklers,
they have definite ties to the Epsteins and the through the World Jewish Congress. They have ties to Wexner and all these people. So this is a dark family to begin with. But if you've come through this trauma, let's say you've been in one of these camps or schools, however you want to classify it, and you've been through the trauma of that, much like somebody that gets molested at an early age, they grow up having a decision to make. Am I going to be so against this because of what it did to me, or am I going to fulfill the, or just keep this going on and become the abuser that abused me? So I wonder about this, like with regard to NXIVM. These kids, I mean, the Bronfmans, I would imagine if they've come through this, that the family that they've grown up in might have been subjected to trauma-based mind control of this sorts. So are they just predisposed to starting cults like this because they're so similar to their upbringing, and a tortured, demented lifestyle? This seems. My point is, I get your point. I could understand if like poor kids with no options found their way into cults, but with the rich kids, the power and are they going into this out of necessity, or are they going into this because they're just screwed up kids themselves?
Desire. It's straight desire. That's the hardest thing. It says John Brism and me have done a lot of interviews on We've Read the Documents YouTube channel. Yeah, that's where you can see a lot of work where me and him have really broken down Eckhart schools in North Carolina with some other the Dare Scared Straight stuff and all that other stuff on his channel. But he's done a lot of research with Derek on the Finders cult.
Yes,
with NXIVM. And then me and him met and we started talking about the large group awareness training stuff with Earhart's seminar training and landmark forums. And that stuff comes from all this stuff. So you're not actually talking about NXIVM itself. You would be talking about the inner circle within NXIVM, using those, I think there were some like rainbow schools or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's where, to me, that's when, for 4 or 5 years, it's been 4 or 5 years of, okay, I think this is going to not get any worse, and it gets worse.
Right.
So that's what happened. Like the branding, to show you're, part of the group and the inner circle, the celebrities involved in this stuff. That's why Paris put out her stuff, and Drew Barrymore and Paris Jackson and all these other people who are tied and been attacked and ridiculed for years were able to come forward like, no, I was there too. That is true.
Yeah.
So it validated a lot of survivors.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm it's such a mind messing thing to start really looking at it that deeply when you start also researching what was it that happened in Mexico with the LeBaron massacre happened. That's really a couple articles came out about that, and I was like, holy cow, hold on a second. They're mentioning the rainbow schools and this other stuff with these. What
was that? To explain the massacre, I'm not familiar with that.
Well, the LeBaron family is a very Mormon sect in Mexico, down south of the border in El Paso, that area.
Oh, yes.
And there's a highway where the cartels run their contraband up and through, and it goes right through their territory, basically. And so there's actually documentaries about this stuff already hitting the airwaves already. But yeah, one of the cartels got into it with the LeBaron family and killed like one of the families. And so that Mormon sect actually has to now, not carry guns, to say it politically correct, because I don't want the cartels coming after me anytime in the near future.
Right, right.
But that's how serious it is down there. Like I said, and so there were some articles about this stuff, and it mentioned, like I said, it was crazy stuff. To me, it was more like conspiracy theory out there stuff than reality. Yeah. They were making connections to stuff that I was like, yeah, okay, those rainbow schools, with that stuff, we're down in that same area, but that doesn't make it a Mormon-only thing. And that's where some people have a hard time going, okay, this isn't targeted to those, but those groups of people do want their kids going to their schools. So that's where, to try to explain things, really understand it, a lot of these places they end the name of the place like academy or ranch.
Okay.
And so, like I said, that's one of the blessings I've had in the last 5 years, is had a lot of survivors reach out to me with other survivors going, what do we do? And I'm like, well, get their parents and let me talk to them. And so we talked, and like I said, I was actually able to save kids from being shipped off to places that are very abusive and tragic just by telling them how to Google search. If you got a kid that needs some help and you want to send them to a camp or a wilderness program or something, when you do that Google search, also put abuse at the end of that search. So you're not going to find a place that, okay, yeah, there's been 15 incidents because they don't pre-screen any of the people who, and this guy had a, track record of being what they like to call a minor attracted person these days.
Right. That's code for, being a pedo.
Right.
That's the nice way of saying it. Like, I don't need a nice way of saying it. There's
it needs to be exposed.
You don't deserve a nice way to explain it. You deserve the most graphic way to explain what you are if you're a serial abuser of kids or of anyone really, but especially of children. And I wonder, how does this, or does it even, tie in to the adoption, the adoption agencies that are like sort of.
See, that's why it's hard to talk about, because foster care, daycare, that's just different parts of the Department of Education. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry. So that's separate. And that's where a lot of people actually have done a lot of good work looking into that stuff, because, like I said, it's 1 in 3 to 1 in 4 people is a victim of abuse in life, just in general. They've gone through, a girl's been raped, a dude's been molested or raped himself. Women do it to men, just like men do it to women. Women do it to other women. So when you really start studying and looking into the stuff, you do have to look at things very statistically by demographics, period.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is I spent 7-8 years researching court case after court case of, this girl went to this place and committed suicide. This girl. And so it's very tragic. And it's a very, because I wouldn't want to wish this life on anybody. But do I look back at my life and say I was abused? No, I went through psychological abuse. I can admit that pretty easily.
Yeah.
You have a kid in a room running anger about being shipped to the school they're at in the first place.
Yeah.
It's kind of abusive, and it makes them have very unhealthy coping mechanisms afterwards for many, many years. So I'm glad I did the research. I'm glad I looked into this stuff so I could understand it well enough to explain it to other survivors themselves.
Yeah.
And that's one of the hardest actually things. Is I had a really good friend of mine a couple of years ago come forward, and I says, because there was 2 counselors at the school I went to that are like confirmed kids, their diaries were read because they killed themselves because they were molested by these people at the school, or groomed even.
Mm-hmm.
And so it says there's 3 or 4 different counselors that worked at that school that I graduated from itself through different names. It was called Cascade School at first when I went there, and then it became Shepherd's Ranch, and now it's called a Riverview Christian Academy. These people weren't prosecuted by law. They were terminated and let go. And so they are working at other places now.
Why is there a database that keeps track of these people? Because, whether it be Catholic priests or
trying very hard. There's, like I said, I use the secretprisonforteens.bk webpage. There's Heal Online, SIA, which stands for Survivors of Institutional Abuse. I think it's a .com. It might be one of the other ones, but you can Google Survivors of Institutional Abuse, and that webpage will come up. So I use 5 or 6 different web pages to, just like I said, so I can understand this stuff and explain it to other people. I'll send them these different web pages and what part of this stuff do you want to understand better?
Yeah.
Like I said, when it's advertised as behavior modification, that's mind control. That is, like I said, trauma-based mind control, but that's why the counselors and therapists that do treat these people call it complex post-traumatic stress disorder that they're dealing with.
Interesting. So is there regulation or some sort of oversight on these behavior modification programs? Because that's very vague.
They're supposed to be.
There's not.
Unfortunately, you pay $100,000, they'll look the other way.
Yeah.
Which is that certification that they need to be an accredited school. What do they have to do? Well, they got this person there as a nurse. That covers their, with doctor requirement stuff. And then this person over here has a PhD in psychiatry. Man, he's a psychiatrist and he's making a hell of money to come to the school and talk to kids in group forum setting. But like I said, is he a part of a cult? Is it a cult? And like I said, that's where I really was like, when I was researching this cult stuff, to me, it was just like, okay, there are no cults on this planet. There are just a bunch of high control groups. And, and you can study theology and you can debate that stuff till you're, like I said, they've been having that debate for 2,000 years. So I don't really want to have that one itself.
Yeah.
So that's why I had to look at it that way. And like this is my understanding of it took a long time to comprehend, like it's just because it advertises, it's equine therapy and this, that could be a front. It could be a way. And like I said, so I almost like I said is when I started looking at this stuff from separating charter schools from rehabilitation therapeutic communities, NatSap, WASP, and these are supposed to be oversight companies, but they're also the ones that are employing and not doing background checks on people to make sure that their wilderness camps are run by good staff.
Why not, though? Why?
Money.
Just
straight up money. Yep. Like I says, how much does it cost to do a background check? And like I says, and they're hurting. Like I says, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry. There are, like I says, the way I like to think about it is there's probably at least 250,000 kids in these types of schools right now in America, being very low barring the edge, the amount probably.
Yeah, I would imagine the education is, subpar. If
those schools that are very orthodox religious, like I said, is when they're not going to class and they're studying the Bible. Like I said, some of the people I'm at can quote the Bible inside and out, and I'm like, I went to a Montessori elementary school. I thought I kind of had to study theology a lot growing up. These people were doing it 10 times, and so like I said, that's where it keeps them in group think. And they use, like I said, it's called loaded language. They get people to start not. Like I said, when the craziest thing about this stuff for me was looking at who I went to school with. Because a lot of rich celebrity kids in California got sent to the same boarding school I went to.
Yeah.
That's why I don't say a lot of names. Like I'm literally, some people are in court. Hopefully we're going to get a class action one day to go after this stuff because they're now, because of Paris, having the courage to step forward themselves. So
who would have ever thought Paris Hilton, of all people, would be a whistleblower on this sort of stuff? I mean,
she's getting backlash already too.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is the Provo Center. We've been here for 70 years. We've got this statistic of recovery recidivism rate. And it's like, your statistics are off because 5 years later, this person is dead from a DUI or OD'd or in prison for, running a money scam of some sort.
Right.
And it's kind of been crazy. Like says, that's why, like says, Paris coming out, the documentary she did, the end of it, the last half is very much other girls doing they would do poster boards. And it would say hashtag breaking code silence. And then they would list the place they went to and their issues in life. And one of the girls, like I said, she was breaking down going, I can't make the board even. Because it's, to me, her just trying to make it brought it all back forward. So that's why I'm really careful with this stuff, saying, you know what, if they're a survivor and they don't want to address some of this stuff, don't force them. Wait for them to be ready.
Yeah.
And so that was what more important part of it too. There's telling your parents, basically, I don't trust you now because you hired the transporter. And then you let this stuff go on and you didn't believe me. And I was scared to come forward for all this time. Was, to me, just an amazing thing. And her mother to hear it and to apologize is something, like I said, that's a miracle to me. For Paris and her mother to have that understanding, okay, I don't blame you anymore and you don't blame me anymore for that incident happening. And they can move forward and now deal with the trauma that Paris, and like says, so that's where you're right. I was very surprised by it. But I'm also hoping those other girls are going to have more of a voice to get out there because they all didn't just go to Provo. There's Cross Creek Manor, Diamond Ranch Academy. I get in a lot of trouble because I do call out the big names in this stuff. But Turnabout Ranch, Dr. Phil's place, it's involved.
Really?
Oh, yeah. So like I said, you can Google the WAF survivor page online, and there's a troubled turnabout stuff, and it shows the links between certain doctors and certain things. So like I said, that's why I started being careful about 4 years ago when people started coming at me going, you shouldn't be talking about these are doing good places. And I'm like, I'm not saying that isn't a good place. Yes, I went through the same kind of place, and I didn't have that bad of an experience myself either. But they fired people since then. Things have changed, and yes, hopefully these programs are being run right. But like I said, that's why I'm so vocal.
Yeah.
How much I speak out, there are kids being abused and made to, like I said, it's just disgusting to me when you really start looking into what's going on. To me, knowing that there's a guy in New England somewhere doing therapy supposedly yoga stuff, and he's one of the counselors that literally was fired from the place I am for being inappropriate with younger age girls. And then we found a guy 5 years ago. Actually, we had a high school reunion in Reading, and we were all sitting there around the fire just one night talking, and some girl just, this happened, and I was like, everyone was like, what? We're like, we knew this happened, but we didn't know what happened to you. And so that made everyone inspired. We found one of the guys was working at a yacht club in Southern California with kids.
Whoa.
He was fired within a week. Yeah, he was fired within a week, and like I said, we don't know where he is. Like I said, they stay off grid because there are about a group of about 2,000 of us, all survivors in these different Facebook groups, that we do keep as tight of rein on this stuff as we can. But that's when it gets sad that there's a new dude being charged with pedophilia, child abuse daily.
Yeah. What's the role of psychology in this? You mentioned, qualifying as having a school. You've got a school nurse. You've got a PhD, and so you've got the
there's stuff in the American Psychological Association about this stuff.
Yeah, I would imagine this would be so easy. If you're a dirty school, it's so easy to have a psychiatrist on staff that just says, listen, this is what we have to do to get through to these kids. I mean, yes, this is all normal. Them calling you parents, them calling you and saying that everything is bad, this is normal. This is the process they go through. And when a psychiatrist
are there,
yeah,
they're there getting their hours to become psychiatrists. That's what some of the counselors are at these schools doing.
Oh, Jesus.
So that's why it says it just gets worse. Like it says, have a nurse that's been in a DUI accident. Where's she going to go work? These schools are great for her to go work at.
Yeah.
In nursing, they can use that to make them look good. So yeah, it's very, and like I said, is when I looked into this stuff and started talking to some of the survivors, and I was being directed to psychiatrists. One of the survivors, a friend of mine, just came forward a couple of weeks ago that she's a trauma therapist today, friends with and starting to work with Dr. Daniel Lilach. Who I think they're going to do some great, amazing thing for the survivors, especially the females. Like I said, that's, to me, the boys is a different group. I keep this separate for that stuff because the Agape boys and the stuff that these guys are doing with that, it's a much more tragic, brutal story than the girls being flirty fished and groomed and all that stuff. But she finally kind of came forward, that she realized that she had been groomed by a counselor there. And that he inspired her to go down the path she's on right now, career-wise. So that's why it took her so long to kind of comprehend that, he was inappropriate with me since I was only 15 when I got to the school, and he was there as a counselor. But did they date? Like, I don't know all the details, and that's why I can't tell the story. She's got her own story to tell.
Yeah.
But there's 1,000 stories like that. And that's why it's very, very crazy that, it does involve psychiatrists and psychology to a master's degree level.
Yeah.
To understand what the repercussions of going through those kind of programs and then getting into that lifestyle for as long as they do. So that's the thing, is there was a company known here in Tulsa, Oklahoma as Teen Choice. Because Teen Choice was those guys who came to my elementary school and talked to me about, your buddy is not always your buddy, scared straight, tough love, dare, drug awareness, re-education stuff. That's what that group was. And like I said, and I always remember growing up as a kid that connected to Princess Diana and Nancy Reagan with the 3 strike stuff. So like I said, that's, to me, like I said, it took me a long time to understand, that was the beginning of my indoctrination. This other stuff was heavy indoctrination. And so, so that's some of the friends I talk with. We talk about the stuff because it's called Sea-Doo lingo or Cascade lingo. Getting on top of it, getting a haircut. Like I said, we understand what we're saying to each other because we lived and we spoke that way to each other for years.
Yeah.
But you try to explain to other people, it's like, okay, I don't like explaining to people that, okay, I couldn't say for 2 years of my life, if I said Metallica, I'm in deep trouble.
Wow.
Acceptable music at that school.
Now, can I make a parallel? And this is, I'm going to give a big disclaimer because these people love to sue everybody. Don't sue me for this. I'm just asking the questions. But I feel like there's some parallels between this, these camps and the Scientology component. I mean, you mentioned it with like the isolation and the having to exposure, it's getting around a circle and, saying, I have a problem with you and I got a problem, it seems
you're getting into some real deep water here.
Yeah.
There's a lot of similarities here from what I understand. I've talked to a few survivors of that stuff itself, and they explain things. Because to me, it's operating Thetan level 3, I think, is where things get really squirrely with some space opera stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I never went through any of that stuff. I never held the cans, did any auditing, did any of that stuff. So I know, there probably are similarities here, but I don't understand that stuff that well. I know that there were some schools connected to that organization known as the Delphi Academies.
Yeah. So
they're being watched. They're like, that's, to me, it's just, I'm very careful about that stuff because I have friends in LA and I don't want to say anything and I don't know if they're involved in that stuff. I don't know. Yeah. I have a few friends that have taken the communication course. It's called the communication course. I don't really understand what they're saying when they say it, but it's a communication course, and they say it's very good. That they very much would recommend it even after they've left.
Interesting.
So it's it's crazy.
With these camps, though, we're back to the kids and everything. I would imagine that there's two prongs happening at the same time. If you're running these camps, you have the kids and you're dealing with the kids and everything that comes with that. And then you're also probably trying to manage the parents and grow this thing, right? Grow this into a business. The more kids, if you're getting $100,000 a year from these troubled kids, well, then it's like, how many of these troubled kids can I get? I've got 10, I'm going to get 100,
$60,000 to $100,000 the average range for these rehabilitation therapeutic programs.
Mm-hmm.
And they're being subsidized through government.
Oh, okay. That's
kickbacks too. So that's what I'm saying on is there is a big issue with this stuff.
Yeah.
And if you're getting kickbacks from the government for food, electricity, and other stuff, you're going to start getting into some serious, serious money. That's why it says just having 30 clients at the school, you don't have to take care of the 30 clients. They're your livestock, basically. All you have to do is manage the parents. Now, if you can get those parents to come do this seminar so they can understand what their children are doing, now you're making more money off of the parents themselves getting indoctrinated into this program system. So it's like I said, that's what I'm saying. I know it happens. I know it's happening daily right now. People are doing these weekend seminars. We go out into the woods for 5 days doing trust falls and rope camps.
Yeah.
And then you get your emotional high and you go home and you're okay for 6-7 months. But then things start going bad in your life again. So let's go back and do another one. Here's this other program. This is $15,000. I'll be getting so much more out of this experience.
Yes.
When they do advertise it very much, just exactly like you'll be getting emails and flyers and stuff delivered to your door daily. How
much of this ties in with neuro-linguistic programming and the
alien dialectics and neuro-linguistic programming?
Yeah.
Cadence is repetition.
Yeah.
Works very well, and it's very easy to do.
Is that why I get the feeling that the Tony Robbins stuff is kind of cult-like?
Oh, yeah. No. Tony Robbins, yes. Tony Robbins is a new age cult.
Okay. I mean, I'm not trying to say that, like, if for anybody that's
say it's a new religious movement, at least in his own mind, that he is the head of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, is it an abusive cult, or is he doing this to young ladies and divorced 3 girls now and is on his third 20-year-old wife? Well, there might be a different story than other people that have done the exact same stuff, writing these new age self-help books.
Wow. Yeah. I wondered about
the soul guy. I think he sent his kid off to one of these schools too. He himself sent his kid off to one of these places.
Interesting. Yeah, this is fascinating, because what I was thinking was when you were mentioning the kids and managing the parents and then inviting the parents to the seminar, I thought, oh wow, I didn't even think about that. That there's a whole new avenue, a whole new revenue stream, which is these camps, these one-off camps like the Tony Robbins style camps. Come in and yes, there's trust falls and all that stuff, but we're going to get you
a seminar that we're going to be having in Dallas, Texas today, but then I'll be in Houston next week, and then I'll be in LA. Like he says, no, they do these seminars. I know people that pay $5,000 to go to every seminar these people do. They follow them around, and I'm like, that's like the Grateful Dead cult stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's crazy.
I could understand it if everyone was on acid following these cults around, but take the acid out of the equation, and I don't know what you're doing. Now, my business partners do a TV show, a house flipping TV show on HGTV, and we got approached about doing the seminars, and I was like the company approached me because I managed their stuff. So
you're actually talking about a very lucrative thing right now.
Oh yeah. The numbers they were throwing at us were ridiculous. But what's funny is before we started the TV show, before we even started filming episode 1, we talked about that stuff. I said, listen, you're going to get approached about these real estate seminars, these get rich real estate seminars. And they said to me, and I've been friends with them for almost 20 years, but they said to me, how do you feel about those seminars? I said, I fucking hate them. I hate them. I think they're scams. And they said, good, we do too.
I agree with you, by the way.
So when we get these offers, and at last count, we've been offered on 6 different occasions, we've been offered. The numbers they're throwing around for what we have to do is, it's money you can't turn down. And yet we turned it down every single time because I said, well, that's great. We'll get all this money, but how much of that money do you want to set aside for lawsuits? Because you will get sued. Well, they'll come after us for being a part of this whole thing because it's a scam. Right. Like a scam, it's free for this seminar.
Were written into the contracts with the production companies though. So I don't know if you would be liable or if the production company would be liable for that stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. We never got to that. We never got to that point.
That's why I did some of that stuff.
I faked interest long enough with the guys in order to get an offer so that I could see what they were talking about. And I was like, "Hey, you want to make $100,000 for 4 days of work?" And they're like, "No, not interested." I was like, I knew we weren't going to do it, but I was like, "This is the type of money we're talking about."
Yeah. Like I said, 7 figures is easy in these people's eyes. That's to start looking at it from that different denomination is where you're getting into insurance and actually some other stuff that, because I like the industry, the entertainment industry stuff. So
yeah,
I've been following that stuff for so long that you're very much hitting the nail on the head that is the new wave. Get your holistic oil, your, kombucha and your remodel on, and let's flip a rehab.
Yeah.
So that's I'm not surprised to see that there isn't a reality show about that stuff.
Well, these guys all, I kept an eye on them, and these guys all started getting raided and started getting massive lawsuits. If you do this stuff to people, when you charge, it's one thing to invite someone to a free seminar. It's another thing when they say, well, the next seminar is $1,800. And the next seminar after that we're going to talk you into is a $15,000 seminar. And these people are just like, get your credit. And like the free
seminar. That's crazy. I can't believe there's so many people still doing that.
The free seminar, during part of the free seminar, what they explain to you is this is how you contact your credit card company to get them to up your limit of your credit card so that you can be eligible, so that you'll have enough money to go put our program on your credit card. It's the whole thing. Everything about it rubs me the wrong way.
Right. That's one of the things that I think is a big thing for me is multi-level marketing is a basis for the troubled teen industry. They team up and do multi-level marketing across these corporations with the wilderness, like I said, the boarding school, with the wilderness camp, with these transporters and the educational consultants. They are a company. They form a company. And that's how WASP and these other companies started 50 years ago.
Wow. This is leading me into our final topic of discussion, but I think it feels consistent with this. And this is this development 25, maybe 35 years ago of the private prison industry. And when they started monetizing freedom, it's the most disgusting thing ever, but I shouldn't be too surprised that in our level of, our business world, that it won't take long before people try to monetize this sort of stuff. We have these companies like Whack and Hut, Correction Corporation of America, these companies.
SCS, Serco. Yeah, I know about them all.
Yeah, exactly. Big ones, big money makers, publicly traded companies in some cases, out there monetizing freedom. Is this a feeder mechanism into private prison industry?
Juvenile. This is just juvie. This is just juvenile.
This is private juvie.
Right. Yeah. Private juvie for elite, rich parents. Very much so. If you can't afford it, you're going to juvie hall. If you can't afford it and the parents don't want the kid, foster care is an option for them. So yeah, it's a sad, sad world that people will give away their kids.
Wow.
A single mother with no parent, no job. I mean, like I said, it's sad what some people are driven to in this world we live in today. And you're right. When you start looking back into the private, like I said, I like to call it the psychological prison industrial complex, even to look at it that way. Started back with Reaganomics, and Clinton, 3-strike rule. Now they got search and frisk, and you got some weed on you, kid. Guess what? You're going to one of my judges' rehabs over here. And unfortunately, that's very true in the state of Texas, because I got in some trouble in Texas for that. And I had to go through a prison rehab actually down there because I got caught with a mushroom, to be honest with people about some stuff. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Look, that's people that come to me, why should we listen to you? You're a convicted felon. I'm like, I am a convicted felon for a non-violent offense because I had a
convicted of mushrooms. Man, I paid my way through college selling mushrooms. I think the statute of limitations.
I was a DJ. I deserved to get shipped off to the boarding school. I did. Yeah. It was the afterwards where I didn't know how to deal with life and wasn't able to, like I said, get some family foundation because of my fear of commitment and some other stuff. Because I always felt someone was going to turn their back on me and stab me in the back and blame me for everything.
Understandable going through this where you're in a process where you've got the other guy who's supposed to rat on you if you don't, I mean, this is developing traumas. It's developing PTSD for people. This is for kids. And then of course, as a kid, you're still trying to process, you're still trying to grow, and you don't know if this is normal. I mean, what's normal these days, right? If it was happening in your family, they've got it set up.
John hooked up, actually. John Brisman and I cooked over because he's really into the stomach, gut, enzyme, mental health approach through like whole exercise. He can explain things to me on the level. I'm like, okay, dude, you got to really dumb it down when it comes to what's known as the blood-brain barrier. Like I said, we get into that. We get into some huge fights, me and John. You have this perspective, and I just don't understand it. But yeah, it's really crazy. And you just don't know what to do with some people that no matter what you do, logical fallacies and cognitive dissonance will always affect some people.
Yeah.
And they will never understand that this, while it is, 50% of the kids that come out of these schools never have another incident in their life. Great. But the other 50% that do recidivize and end up in the institutions and prisons that taxes pay for, maybe there's a better approach here. Maybe we should have some more oversight. And so, that's where, the last 3 years, I've had more fights with should the police defund the police, as they like to say.
Yeah.
Did that happen? And I'm like, well, what happens when you get robbed and stuff? What are you going to call? What's going to happen? What are you going to do? And that's where people are going to be like, oh, okay, you're right. That thin blue line is going to always exist, I guess. But I'd rather have the cops there than not have them there in the first place. Now, it need to be private industry run as a corporation stuff. Well, it kind of already is, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
That's where the mayor and the chief of police, and I think what's happened in America in the last few days with the Capitol and stuff, there's a lot to be said there alone. And that's what I'm saying is that's how large I think the repercussions of some of this stuff really go. When you start looking into the new modern Mockingbird mass media, behavior modification, social engineering stuff, like I said, John and me researched with Neil Sanders about Cambridge Analytics and that Fusion GPS stuff when that Uranium One deal started coming out. So yeah, you really get into it. When you look into this stuff, it's so multi-millions of dollars. They used to run into parent companies that are connected to other parent companies that are connected to, it's a very small group from what I understand.
Wow. It's very dark, but just because this topic is dark doesn't mean we should avoid it. In fact, quite the opposite. In order to prevent things like this from happening in the future, the best solution is to is first to know that it exists, to try to understand it as best you can. And then after that, then you can set about trying to fix it. But as pretending, whether it's the troubled teen industry or the private prison industry or whatever, just to pretend that these things don't exist is the worst solution possible because we get nowhere. Let's acknowledge this, let's acknowledge the darkness of it, the possibility that some of these places are set up specifically set up to commit unspeakable crimes while profiting at the same. I mean, everything about that is dirty and disgusting, and yet it's a component that we need to at least acknowledge. Maybe not dwell on. Maybe it doesn't become a part of everybody's day-to-day life, but to know that this exists, to know that this is out there. Maybe not for your kids, maybe for your nieces and nephews that are getting ready to go off to camps or things like this. Something to consider before you take that troubled kid, that quote troubled kid of yours that may probably not be troubled by society's standard, but maybe only by your standard. Be very careful. There are some dark operators out there that have designs on your kids. They want your money too on top of that. And of course, you'll be the last to know that it's happening, especially if it's a situation, Lee, like you mentioned, where they're not able to communicate back to their friends and families. This is all extremely dark, but I think very important. Where can people find your work if they want to continue? You mentioned doing shows with John Brisson, who was on this show, and of all the guests I've had on this show, nobody got more positive feedback than John did. People were like, get that guy back on because he knew his stuff. Where can people find your work? I get the feeling people are going to have similar takes about you and the research that you've done. Where can they find you?
Well, because I do show on We've Read the Documents YouTube channel with John. We've taken a little break because there's court things involved that we're just, there's no need to do shows if we're waiting for court dates to come and go to see what happens with certain laws and certain things happening in different states now. So that's the main place. And I'm on Twitter. Basically use Twitter for people. You can contact me through there is where, like I said, I don't really do this. Like I said, I don't like to consider myself as an educational consultant in this industry. I just do other stuff with John, and then I'm kind of semi-retired now because I drove an 18-wheeler for a long time and then inherited stuff when my mother passed away. So, but like I said, no, that's the best two places for me right now. Me and John will be doing stuff again in the future when it becomes relevant and some stuff. Like I says, his work is awesome. Yeah. The other places is, like I said, it's hashtag Breaking Code Silence is just the best, one of the best places. But then there's SIA.org and the WAF Survivor Group too. So like I said, there's a lot of outlets for people to get information from to make up their own minds on this stuff.
Yeah,
that's the best advice I have for anybody here, because it took me a long time, 49 years, to kind of comprehend that I'd spent basically 30 years of my life in recovery, institutions and different things because I'd been locked in that mindset for so long, but I didn't even understand it. And it took one article to make me go, oh, wow, this is a huge mess and I don't want this to go on anymore.
Wow. It's crazy how that starts. Well, we're all on our own little journey. We've all had these things happen in our lives. I'm so grateful that you're able to come on and explain it in a way that makes sense, talk about some really dark things. That's Lee Veltman, everybody. Follow him on Twitter. He's really good. He's I mean, if you can follow me on Twitter too, but let's just be honest, I'm not going to be there for much longer. Thanks, Lee, for everything that you do. We certainly do appreciate you.
Thank you, Charlie, very much. It was an honor and a blessing.
Thanks. Hey, everybody, share this show. Get it out there. Do what you can to spread the word. We need all your help and support. Thanks, everybody.